All right, back with you on the Newsfeed PM. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's meeting with President Cyril Ramaphosa was on the spotlight this week. His visit has been seen by some as a fundamental shift in Pretoria's approach to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Joining us now is Prof. Gilbert Khadiagala, an international relations expert. Prof, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. How significant is this visit that has seemingly caught the eye of some international players, especially Trump and Putin?
It is important that Zelensky has a meeting with President Ramaphosa, because Ukraine has always wanted to engage South Africa from the outset, from the beginning. But you recall that at the UN vote, South Africa did not vote to condemn Russia, which was interpreted as probably a tilt towards Russia. So Ukraine has, or Zelensky really wanted to come to Africa and to come to South Africa, but he didn't have an opportunity. The meeting therefore symbolizes what is essentially a significant shift in South Africa's posture towards the war, which is that it is now more willing to talk to Zelensky, even as it maintains its relationship with Putin. But also remember that 2023, Ramaphosa was on a group of countries, African countries, that were trying to mediate this conflict. Those mediations did not come to fruition. So it's not the first time these two leaders are meeting, but him coming to South Africa symbolically, I think, is important that South Africa can come on board and really articulate the view that this war has to end, which has been the message from day one. I think the Ukrainians just thought that South Africa was very close to Moscow. But if you talk to South African leadership, they say, no, they actually just wanted a neutral position, not to condemn Russia, but to advance the objective of peace. So it didn't come at the very right time for Zelensky, because he was under attack. It was continued attack from the Russians. But yet it made the point that engaging South Africa is critical, because South Africa is a key player in Africa.
Yeah. South Africa, party Mkhonto weSizwe, which of course President Zuma strongly aligned to the Russian President Putin, rather, is saying that Ukraine is to blame for the current crisis, right? Is this going to add any pressure on Ramaphosa, considering that maybe there are some also in his party, knowing that MK party, of course, is a breakaway from the ANC?
No, I don't think it's going to put any pressure on the government, because those voices have been here before. You remember from the beginning, the EFF was talking about South Africa should send troops to help the Russians against Ukraine. So the MK line is a line that has been very much in the political marketplace, if we could put it that way. At this moment, when it looks that there's going to be a breakthrough in the peace process in Ukraine, I don't think there should be much division within the South African political system about who should be favoring who. I think there is broad consensus across parties that the war should end. So I think the discussions around whether the government is now tilting towards Ukraine against Russia, I don't think that's a useful debate at this moment.
So before the meeting, of course, President Ramaphosa would have had a telephone conversation with Putin, also having a telephone conversation with Donald Trump, it seems, and both agreeing that the war in Ukraine needs to stop. Will that be enough to put pressure?
No, what it does is that it pushes the two sides, that means Russia and Ukraine, to commit more to this peace process that was launched by the Americans. But it also puts pressure on the Americans to do more in terms of what I'm describing as an even-handed position. Trump, despite the fact that he claims he wants that war to end, it looks like the terms of the final agreement are now tilted more in Russia's side. And Ukraine is very worried about losing territory. So the question now is, how do we come back to a mediated process that looks at both sides, the interests and the concerns of both sides? The Ukrainians still are convinced that any of these agreements that are being peddled around by the American mediators are going to disadvantage them. So I think it's a good moment. And the meeting today, for instance, at the Vatican was important to reinforce the position that you need an even-handed American mediator so that you can get an agreement that both sides can buy into, rather than looking disproportionately as if it's Trump doing a deal with Putin to sell out the Ukrainians.
Does South Africa have influence here, considering the relations between South Africa and the United States at the moment, even though there is seemingly some promise of South Africa meeting with Donald Trump?
There has been a meeting that is proposed, but the discussion around it is there'll be a meeting soon. I don't know at this stage how much South Africa can influence the course of the negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians. I think it looks like most of the pieces of a potential agreement are already in place. And it's just now up to Trump to begin to ask Steve Witkoff, his personal representative to the peace process, to now begin to show that the US is playing a neutral role in this conflict, in this mediation, and also bring the Europeans on board. South Africa is already on board, so I don't know how much would be expected of South Africa to contribute to this process. I think we're saying at this point that the mediation process is so far advanced that what we need now is just simply a big commitment on the American side so that the agreement that is reached is an agreement that both sides can live with, can be proud of. It does look now that these are the draft agreements on the table are very problematic for Ukraine.
Even though President Zelenskyy says that he is willing to, I suppose, look at these proposals, at least some online publications reporting that, as long as it does not go against the Ukrainian constitution. Not quite sure what that means in relation to, of course, what is on the table.
You see, the beauty of negotiations is that there is a lot of room for give and take. I think the bigger concessions the Ukrainians have made at this moment is that they are willing to discuss the issues of land and territory, which means there's a lot of room for concessions. Maybe if they start off with Crimea, for instance, Crimea, which was annexed in 2014, maybe if the Ukrainians can agree to give the Russians Crimea, and then they tell the mediators, this is our final position. The territories that were occupied since the war started this time are not going to be negotiable. So there is some concession on land on Crimea, but it's not a whole concession. I think the Ukrainians can live with it. The question is, are the Russians going to accept giving up the land that they have already occupied since the war started, including also Crimea, which they already had anyway? So the point I'm making is that as long as the Ukrainians have at least agreed to talk about land, there's a lot of room, in fact, for more concession making, especially from the Russians, who now look like the bullies at the table.
Prof, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Professor Gilbert Khadiagala there, international relations expert.